an interesting point. But, Prof, to the extent that, as I illustrated, we now have ministries without substantive ministers, all because of this tussle over the Constitution. And, of course, the democratic dispensation has made this possible. This certainly cannot be a good thing, can it? Professor Baffuor Agyeman Duah.
First, good evening. Nice having a good panel joining for this conversation. I agree wholeheartedly with what the lawyer has said. I think some of you are looking at it as a crisis or dilemma only because we haven't encountered this. And you see, this is the very first time in the 30 years of our republic that we have a speaker not coming from the ruling party, but rather from the minority. And that has brought a certain vitality, so to speak, to the legislature. So for me, this is a real test of our democracy. And as he said, the three arms of government are there to check each other, especially the legislature on the executive. So what is happening on one hand is something we should cherish because we are looking at how these branches of government are testing each other. Of course, we expect that they don't go beyond a certain threshold. Other than that, I think there's nothing wrong with that. Now to your substantive question of whether this is going to have effect on some ministries, the 7 ministries that you listed earlier that do not have substantive ministers. Yes, in a way, because I'm sure that there are certain issues at the ministries where the substantive minister is the one who can deal with, especially when it comes to signing important documents, contracts, and other things. But I think that the president, if he wishes, can use his executive powers to empower a deputy or someone to act and play that role. Of course, he hasn't chosen to do that. And so far, we don't have any reports of any of these 7 ministries having a standstill in terms of their functions. So in that respect, it's hard for me to say it's having a negative impact. Because after all, as you know, oftentimes a minister can be away for weeks on a different assignment. But as I say, unless there are some substantive issues, like certain critical documents that can only be signed by the ministers, other than that, I think these ministries continue to function.
Prof, let me challenge you a bit on that, because one of the ministers in the tourism ministry that's who has just been recently being appointed, Andrew Japamesa, told us that he's now had to obviously step aside after he's been vetted, and the president has appointed a caretaker minister. And you've made the point. There's some real substantive steps, measures, policies that a substantive minister is empowered to take, sign documents and contracts on our behalf that a caretaker minister may not be able to do. That definitely will stall processes. We have the sanitation ministry, we have the health ministry, for example, and a very important ministry. If you drill down, for a country like ours, where we are in our development journey, we don't need this now, do we? I mean, a U.S., for example, can afford to have a gridlock over the approval of the budget, for example, that always threatens a government shutdown. I mean, they are so far ahead in their development, the system and the democracy always recovers. But many will make the point to you that for a country like ours, we cannot be doing this at this time.
I think you make an excellent point, Evans. You're right. Certain countries, such as the US, can afford to do this, but we cannot. I agree with you perfectly. That's why I threw in the caveat that if it goes beyond a certain threshold, then of course we can begin to feel the negative impact of the vacancies in these very critical, important ministries. So my hope is that these two sides will find a way to quickly resolve this, because the country cannot afford these critical ministries lying idle for weeks or months without a substantive minister. So I do agree. The point here is that I think it's important, first of all, for us to appreciate what is happening, because it has never happened before. That's how you test the resilience of democracy, the resilience of good governance that we've been preaching for decades. So for me, it's a real test, and I appreciate that. At the same time, I expect our leaders, the leaders of the legislature and the executive, to also realize that they are not there for certain parochial interests. They are there for the interest of Ghanaians. And therefore, any action or inaction on their part that will hurt that common interest of the people is also not acceptable. So I think very soon we should see them coming together. But finally, Evans, it's important for us to also realize that governance, besides the legalities and the systems, relies very much also on the human agencies that operate the government. In other words, the character behavior of leaders go a very long way in achieving goals. So if these two leaders, for instance, are going to be recalcitrant and not willing to meet, that would be surprising. In fact, I expected that the executive to have invited privately the speaker to a private meeting over breakfast, over wherever, for them to sort out things, because these things occur in all democracies where the legislature and the executive may not agree on certain points. But ultimately, they know that they are there to serve the interests of their people, and therefore they will find a way to come together. And that's what I'm expecting our president and the speaker to do within the shortest possible time.
Okay.